Abai. First lines. Almaty, Awezov Museum. The writer's office, everything on the desk is just like it was during Mukhtar Awezov's life. There are his telephone, pens and pencils, and a golden eagle. He always resorted to this method. When he experienced difficulty while he was working, it was enough for him to stroke the golden eagle on the head and everything turned out well. The silent witness of creativity, it shows firsthand how difficult it was for Awezov to write those pages of the novel. Awezov wrote an article, How This Book Was Created, where he wrote that he met with more than 1,000 people who knew Abai. A native of the same region as the protagonist of this book, Awezov was friends with Abai's son, Turagul. He communicated with Abai's wives, Dilda and Aygarim. He heard a lot of stories about him, both real and hoaxes. Mukhtar Awezov's aunt was the last wife of young Conan Abai's father. And despite family ties to the great poet, it was not easy for Mukhtar Awezov to recreate Abai's life. There is no written data about Abai's childhood, Awezov wrote. But is it so? Maybe at least small references have been preserved. And if so, where to find them? All riddles are coming from childhood. In search of new stories, we visit Abai's birthplace. Can one remember the moment of his birth? This is what he saw at birth. Where is the photo of Conan? But how genuine is this photo? Who was the first to write about the poet? She somehow found the German edition of letters and diaries. Unsolved mystery of birth, incredible family legends, and an unexpected discovery. Chapter 1. To remember everything. From his father's side, Abai came from generations of famous leaders and beys of the Tobekti clan. The great-grandfather of the poet Ilgaz Bai, who was bey and Batur, moved from Tobekti clan from Turkestan to the Chingiz Mountains, which were excellent for pasture. Grandfather of Abai, Uskem Bai, acquired the glory of a fair bey in his native steppe, Ali Khan Bukekhanov. In Chingiz Mountains, excellent pastures. Abai was born in Sud Kuzkabulak. Kuzkabulak is located 110 kilometers from Semey. But where exactly this happened seemed to remain unknown. August the 10th, 1845. An absolutely incredible story. It was passed down from generation to generation. It was told that he once asked his mother, "Why, when I was born, the world was red and green?" Everyone was amazed because on the day when Uljan gave birth to Abai, red-green wool was hung everywhere. This is what he saw at birth. Like a master, the Creator adorned the whole earth. You are the grace of his endless kindness. Like a mother, the earth expires with love. Like a father, heaven gently bowed towards you. Abai Kunanbayev. A few kilometers from Kuzkabalak, there is a fertile land of Jitabai. Succulent grasses, springs, convenient settlement, and it's easy to get to Jailao from here. In the winter season, of course, this place does not look so attractive. A piercing wind, rare bushes covered with hoarfrost, and the mountain range can hardly be seen behind the foggy haze. Conan settled in this place in 1840. The front room. As you enter, on the left, there is a skull cap on the wall. Conan bought it from Arabia when he was on the pilgrimage to Mecca. It was the place where they spend their winters. Around this area, but not in this house, it was built much later. In the 40s, 50s, there were houses where people who worked in the museum lived, but nothing was left from the time when Conan was alive. It's not known exactly how many buildings there were in the winter settlements of Conan, but guests used to visit often. According to Mukhtar Awezov, Abai lived with his grandmother and mother in the largest house of the settlement. It was cozy, spacious, decorated with expensive carpets. This is the village of Abai's grandmother, Zerieh, and mother Uljan. They both were buried not far from Jidabay, about a kilometer away. He was raised by his grandmother and mother. The future poet was also called Telkara because he was nourished by two mothers. Uljan, Abai's mother, and his grandmother Zerieh were traveling together. Conan had 4 wives. Uljan was his second wife. Whether they married for love or for political and financial reasons is unknown. One thing is clear, for Conan Abai held a special place among his other sons. Abai's mother, Uljan, was from the generation of the famous Byers in the Bashan clan. The most popular brothers, humorists in the Kyrgyz steppe, Kontai and Tontai, were her uncles, Alikhan Bukekanov. They say that there were a lot of orators in the Uljan family and, as they would say today, satirists. It is no coincidence that their ancestors became beys and influential aksakals. From ancient times, complex disputes were dealt with by those who were never in loss for words, and people in the Kazakh steppes always respected the wise word. Not without reason, from the very birth, people predicted a special fate for Abai. Interestingly, there's another legend connected to his birth. This legend says that when Saint Yeshen came to Abai's grandmother Zerieh, he said that her daughter-in-law, Uljan, would close the Shinga mountains, that is, the Khan mountain, with the hem of her skirt. This meant that Zerieh's daughter-in-law would give her a great-grandson. She was called the mother of the tribe, the female ancestor of the Irgizbai clan. Grandmother Zerieh was the eldest wife of Abai's grandfather, Oskenbai. Conan was her only son. They say Abai was very attached to his grandmother. The poet's grandmother and mother, Uljan, together called him affectionately Abai, Abai Bol, Abai La, which means be attentive and thoughtful. This name was the second name for Conan's son. At birth, he was named Ibrahim. Ibrahim is not an ordinary name. It's taken from the Quran. All the stories about the mother and grandmother of the great poet, how they looked, and what kind of personalities they had, are based only on oral legends. But a lot has been written about the poet's father. Conan through the eyes of his contemporaries, and in the focus of a photographer, is there really a picture of him? What kind of documents already have been discovered by archivists and researchers? And where is the first written mention of Abai? Chapter 2. At the foot of Shinga's Dao. 1846. The expedition of General Vishnevsky. The main task was to prevent the steppe aristocracy from joining the rebel Kenesari Khan. At the same time, they conducted a census. The district governor of the Tobukti tribe, B. Conan participated in some part of the journey, along with the expedition. When the general asked Conan did he like the view of the Alatau, he said, "Great Almighty, how did you arrange everything?" On the mountain, people die from frost. Down below, they die from drought. Another time he said, everything is beautiful. There's everything necessary for horse and cattle, but why do we need all this when it belongs to a stranger and there are so many snakes around? Adolf Januszkiewicz. He begins to write his notes and memoirs about how he lives there. Adolf becomes an official. He learns the language and becomes an interpreter. He felt empathy towards the steppe and those people who were around him. Today's Warsaw. After almost 2 centuries, it's hard to imagine how Adolf Januszkiewicz, along with other rebels, fought on these streets. The uprising for the independence of Poland against the power of the Russian Empire. The November uprising of 1830, where he was wounded, captured, sentenced to death by hanging. The history and fate of Adolf Januszkiewicz is like an epic itself. He had every opportunity to live a beautiful life, had a noble origin and inheritance. Instead of dancing at the ball and position in the lower house of the Polish parliament, he was exiled to the Kazakh steppes. The death sentence was replaced by exile. As an official of the border administration with a good knowledge of the Kazakh language, Adolf also participated in the expedition and left a lot of notes. Of course, the image of Conan comes to the forefront. We are used to seeing Conan as an autocratic person through the stereotype created by Soviet ideology. In the recordings of Januszkiewicz, Conan appears in a completely different light than in Oezov's novel. Although the description of his appearance is very similar, on the once beautiful face, there were traces of smallpox. These brutal consequences of a terrible disease each time awaken in him sweet memories about the sympathy of his fellow countrymen, the evidence of his merits and significance. Crowds of people were in despair, he told me with excitement and pride. Day and night they were by my yurt, where in unbearable torment I struggled with death. Their tears flooded the fire which was devouring me and begged me on Allah to bring me back to life. Adolf Januszkiewicz.
По молодости он был очень статным человеком, об этом потомки его писали.
His descendants wrote about the fact that in his youth he was a very well-built man. They say that his face was disfigured and his eye was also damaged by smallpox. He was not blind, but he had a drooping eyelid. One eye was covered with an eyelid.
Опущенное веко. То есть один глаз как будто бы был прикрытым.
A small digression from our main topic. There is another mysterious story. Allegedly, there's a photograph of Conan.
Там на фотографии вот сидит.
In the photograph, there's an old man with signs of power, and he doesn't have one eye. But how genuine this photograph is, I don't know.
Глаза нету. Но насколько это вот подлинная фотография, я не знаю.
Interestingly, it's rather a famous photo in the Semey Abai Museum. The photo, which depicts representatives of the steppe nobility, and in the center you can see Genghis Velikhanov. Next to him, a man holding a hat in his hand. Some researchers have suggested that this is Conan. But somehow it doesn't add up, starting from the fact that Genghis Velikhanov was only 3 years older than Conan, and the man in the photograph is at least 10 years younger than Shokan Velikhanov's father, and his appearance does not coincide with the description of the memoirs of a Polish writer. This face can hardly be described as disfigured by smallpox. The photo gave rise to a riddle which stems from the features of the way photographs were taken at the time. They could retouch and paint them a little. The depth of field was shallow and it was very difficult to do group portraits. The photographs of that time rarely had the names of the participants in the shoot. Here, for example, 2 more pictures allegedly of Conan, but most likely this is not him either. We don't have a reliable photo, although perhaps a photograph of Conan still exists. And again back to the steppe. 1846. Conan is only 32 years old. And what a nice epithet Adolf Januszkiewicz used to describe him. Quote, "A star of the first magnitude that shines on all the tribes in the steppe, a shield against the injustice of violence of the rich, and even all the Byers are unworthy to untie the laces on Conan shoes."
Он же был, как пишет
Januszkiewicz wrote that Conan was an expert on both Russian law and the law of the steppes, and he used them skillfully.
И очень умело ими пользовался.
An ironic writing style of Januszkiewicz leaves no doubt. The Polish writer clearly admired Abai's father. Conan is just a talking machine, a watch that does not work only when it is not wound up. As soon as he wakes up, he starts to speak tirelessly until he falls asleep. Every minute people come to him for advice, and he, like an oracle, broadcasts from his tripod, putting his hands on his sides. For every 3 words, a quotation from Sharia law, and his memory is so amazing that he recites all the decrees and orders of the government, as if he's reading them from a book. Adolf Januszkiewicz. Well, where else could we find such detailed written references about Conan Only in the Omsk archive. However, Omsk data is of a completely different nature. A set of documents related to the history of Kazakhstan in our archive is quite big. And part of this set of documents is the administrative and criminal case of the senior sultan of the Karkareli district. Conan of course, was a multifaceted person. He knew how to be different in different circumstances. The case contains numerous complaints and details of the carried out investigation. There are references about the wives of Conan Kunche, Uljan, and Aygaz. They were also interrogated and there were even confrontations. There are no records of Conan young son Abai. There is a record of service, a personal file, so to speak, of the Honorable Bey. A copy of it is stored in the Abai Museum. It's a very valuable document that reveals his social activities, what posts he held, and in what years. You can find answers to some questions regarding the life of Conan This document was found at the Moscow Military Historical Archive. In the record of service, it says that Conan was promoted to ensign in 1846. In 1849, he was approved to become the senior sultan of the Karkareli district, and he was removed from office in 1852. There's a brief information about the future poet. In About the Family section of the document, moreover, the year of his birth is wrong. But is there more detailed information about Abai? Chapter 3. A Sweet Child. Diaries and letters from a journey across the Kazakh steppes. The fate of this amazing book is also unusual. The sun shines brightly. It's a warm autumn in Paris. In 1861, records of Adolf Januszkiewicz were first published in France 4 years after his death. In his notes, he, like his other predecessors, described the steppe and people living in it with great sympathy and great love. According to the memoirs of contemporaries, these descriptions were popular among readers, and Conan became famous already on the European territory, first in Paris, then in Berlin. This book was republished in Germany in 1875. All written sources about Asia were very interesting for Europeans. Notes were edited and published by Januszkiewicz's friend, Felix Wrotnowski. What was lost during the editing is unknown, and then for many years the book was forgotten. Only in the middle of the 20th century, a German publication in the Polish language landed in the hands of a person who appreciated the significance of the texts. During the war, my teacher, Fina Steklova, was a war correspondent. At the time, she was in Poland. She somehow found the German edition of letters and diaries of Januszkiewicz. The book was translated into the Russian language and then into Kazakh. He wrote letters home to his mother, brother, and also kept diaries. Surprisingly, at the time, the mail delivered his letters to his parents. First letters, and then upon his return to Poland, Januszkiewicz brought his diaries. He came back to his homeland in 1856. The unexpected discovery of the famous notes and these records mention Conan Byers' son. Here they are. Conan Byers treats his child, who is suffering from terrible stomach pains, in such a way. He slaughtered a black goat and, having smeared its fat on a blue belt, tied it to his son's stomach. The goat's fat was also rubbed into the son's body. When I asked why he hadn't called any healers, he replied he didn't really believe in their medicine. Adolf Januszkiewicz. The place of writing of these lines in the foothills of Shinga, the village of Conan Byers. Maybe this is the very first written evidence of Byers' childhood. But maybe it's about Byers' brother. After all, Byers wasn't the only child in the family. Yes, he wasn't the only child. So, about whom Januszkiewicz wrote those lines? Let's check this version. It was 1846. Conan Byers had 3 sons. The eldest of them, Kudaiberdi, was 17. His middle son, Tanerbedi, was 12. They were already grown up. And somehow it's hard to imagine that their bellies were smeared with black goat's fat and then a blue belt was tied around their bellies. But the future poet was a 1-year-old baby, and he, like all babies of that age, could have had stomach problems. There are legends according to which Adolf Januszkiewicz played with this sweet child, as he himself wrote, a bon enfant. Perhaps Januszkiewicz would not have spoken in such a way about the unfamiliar child. So maybe he was looking after Byers, but nothing like that was mentioned in the published records. Epilogue. Memory of catching up with time. If it's true, then what an interesting twist of fate it was. He was barely a year old when someone first wrote about him, and that someone was also a poet. And by the time he was 16, people already read about him in Europe. They'd read about knowing that these lines about the future great poet. Hours of Museum. Almaty. He could not read that book. Notes by Januszkiewicz were published in the Soviet Union 5 years after Mukhtar Awezov's death. Details of Byers' life were so collected bit by bit. Are there any more of them? This work can be compared with the work of a belated traveler who comes to the place of a long-gone caravan, finds the last smouldering embers of a dying bonfire, and wants to revive it with his breath in order to inflate it into a bright flame. I had to restore the past of Byers from the faded memory of the elderly people. In the same way, I had to restore a captivating youthful beauty that once fascinated the poet on the face of a 60-year-old Aigerim. Mukhtar Awezov.